Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. It may be a bit ironic that on today's segment of Curating Your Movie Library, for which I'm grateful to have my wife with me once again across the aisle from me. Welcome, sweetheart.
Glad to be here.
We're actually going to cover something that we didn't particularly care for. Despite the fact, by the way, I don't know if you know this, but it's been doing very well. The last few months, Netflix has been sort of rating their own movies in terms of viewership, and this one was number one just last week anyway.
Wow.
And not coincidentally, it's called
One.
The One.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because you're saying we didn't really like it, but we keep watching it.
Yeah, that's true. we haven't
helping
finished
those
it.
ratings.
Yes, I think we've been through 3 episodes, and I think there are 10 or 12 of them. And to me, it sort of checked all the boxes. And I think I actually read that there's an increasing pressure for these streaming companies. Think about this. You know how they come up with these algorithms to make recommendations for you?
Yes.
You like this and this and this and this and this, and we think that means you're going to like that. Well, now they're doing it for what they're making. People like this kind of movie and this kind of movie and this kind of movie. So how can we put them all together? Let's make a Jane Austen zombie time travel heist movie. Because people love it. And there's an element of that here because, and in fact, it hits us. There's a little bit of science fiction-y to it. There's a little bit of almost soap opera-y stuff, sort of like Virgin River, although Virgin River's much more gentle, or maybe a little bit more like Bridgerton. And there is a murder mystery, and there's an Englishness to it. Those are some of those check marks that we tend to like. We tend to like those English shows. I tend to like the murder mysteries. So I was surprised not to much care for it. But maybe more important than, and I don't want to say that it wasn't well done. I'm not an expert on the craft of making shows, so it's not that I'm watching thinking, what a bunch of hackneyed amateurs. I'm just not that engaged. And I would say at the end of the day, it's probably because none of the characters are particularly likable, and it especially focuses in on the one character who's really not likable at all.
Well, and it focuses on an agenda.
Yes.
And so you kind of go from having people looking for their unique matched individual on dating sites, I mean, in the real world that we live in.
Right.
To going into this movie and seeing the enticement of the flesh, learning they can actually find the real person they were meant to be, whether they're married or not.
Precisely.
And it's an excuse to sin, and it's an enticement. And so I think that we see that, and really, looking at the way that our world is evolving into the loving of self and the marriages that are getting destroyed, I think this movie is just kind of a dark overshadowing of what we really see in life. Even though that particular test may not be available, people are still looking for the one, and they'll leave one sound marriage looking for what they remember in high school on Facebook.
Oh, yes, exactly. Yes,
because
very
that's
much
who they
so.
remember being matched with.
Right. And I want to unpack that a little bit more. But first, let me make sure that people who haven't seen this maybe are up on the basic premise. The reason it's called The One is because there's a company called The One, and they have leveraged this DNA sciencey thing where they're able to, if you give them your DNA, they can find the one person who you will respond to best in the world. But only, of course, if that other person sends in their thing, and then they'll match you up. And as you were saying, a number of the stories, sort of sub-stories, the main stories about the woman in charge of the company, and that's the one we really don't, she's not very compelling or likable character. She's not supposed to be. I think she's supposed to be a bad guy, but she's not even a good bad guy. But there are several sub-stories where we're watching pairs either coming together for the first time because of this test, or there's even one couple where, and this, I like this is the kind of surprise I love. We watch as the wife sends in the DNA sample, and we watch her meeting this match, and it's not till the next episode that you realize the DNA sample she sent in was from her husband. Yeah, and the match was her husband's match. Right. That was neat. I like that twist there. But all of those different kinds of scenarios are being played out. Broken marriages. And in fact, again, at the very beginning of the show, there's a British politician who is wanting to regulate the company because there's this great spike in divorce. But, you know, you're right. We don't have the technology, but we have things that are close to it. And I really agree with you on that whole high school looking in our past. We have this foolish idea that because our lives were relatively simple and we didn't have a lot of burdens when we were in high school and we're living this ideal life, that happy whatever relationship we might have had in high school was the real thing. And then when you grow up and you're actually sharing a house and sharing a bed and sharing toothpaste and sharing a toilet paper roll, and sharing bills that you can't meet and all the hardships that come in life together, you think, well, no, that's not what I need. In fact, I've always said that those attempts to reignite old flames, if you will, that it's really not at the end of the day a desire to be with that person. It's a desire to be that age. It's a desire to have the
carefree.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. The level of freedom matched with the high level of freedom, low level of responsibility. That's very appealing to us. We did not. Again, we'll let you know if we keep watching.
We probably will keep watching.
You think so?
For a minute.
For a little while. Yeah. For all we know, it may have a wonderful ending. Maybe we're just losing patience. But
I do think, like I said, I think it reaches into the dark side of our humanity that is looking for a perfect match, a perfect life. And I think what we find out so far in this is that even the woman who created this found out that her perfect match told her no.
Yes.
And he chose something else. So, and I think there's that thought that you don't have the willpower to resist if you have a match, you know. Right. But the whole psychology behind the fact that you're going to drop everything to find the one person that was meant to be for you.
Right. Not a healthy way to look at it.
No. And you are.
I was going to say, yeah, you are as
God
well.
Match.
Yes, he's the one who brought us together. The one, Lord of over all things, has made us one. Thank you, sweetheart.
Amen.
I look forward to being at the movies with you again. I love you.
Bye-bye.
Why should you support the Jesus Changes Everything podcast? Well, here's my answer. First, I want to say this. What you should support first is your local church. I believe there's a biblical command to do that, and I frankly don't believe there's a biblical command for you to support this podcast or any other podcast. So I don't want anything that I say to undermine that first commitment. You have an obligation to support your local church. You need to understand that you are a part of that body and that you have obligations. You're not simply a consumer taking something in. You are an owner. Now, that doesn't mean that you have authority over the elders, but it does mean that you're part of that body. Well, what about a podcast? What about this podcast? Well, let's start with podcasts in general first. I don't know how the marketplace works all of these things out over time. I do know that it does. And these things I'm talking about are essentially it's different business models. When the internet was introduced, there was a great question about how is this going to get paid for? And we all used to pay, well, no, we didn't. We used to get those free AOL floppies first and then CDs later. But there was talk about these micro penny charges that could add up and pay websites that got visited more often than others. There was some level of paywalls, which still exists, but I confess, I don't believe that I have ever paid to read anything on the internet. If I try to, started to, and I run into a paywall, I move on. And that's a part of the equation. There's always someone out there willing to tell you something without making you pay. And by the way, that's me. I don't do this because I don't like it, but I need to do it in order to earn a living. I would love to earn a living doing what I'm doing, but so far, my paychecks for this work have amounted to 0.00 over the last year and a half. So we don't have a clear and obvious model by which this can be paid for. I've done some study on what's said on the internet, the free stuff that I can read about how to bring money in. You have sponsors. You get enough listeners that somehow ads can create income. You have the Patreon system. And at the end of the day, all of those things are complicated and ungainly and uncertain. So what are we left with? Well, we're left with asking. That's what I'm doing. I'm willing to keep doing this. I don't know how long I'll be able to keep doing this, but I'm willing to keep doing this voluntarily. But I'm asking you, if you are being blessed and served by this podcast, to voluntarily come alongside and support this work financially. I'm not going to require it. I'm not creating a paywall. I'm not going to dangle special insider access or other sorts of bonuses that you might find in a Kickstarter campaign. I'm just asking you, is this blessing you? Is this helping you? Is this a part of that process by which you are growing in grace? Is this something you're simply enjoying? And are you willing, you don't have an obligation, but are you willing to help make sure that it does continue on by paying for it? Years ago when I worked at Ligonier Ministries, and I was there when Ligonier started its third and sort of last foray. It's still ongoing to this day, but the last foray into terrestrial radio ministry. And one of the interesting ways that started was what was called the SOAR program, where we said to our constituency at Ligonier, hey, we've got all this material, and we're more than happy to put it together and cut it in such a way that it would fit in a typical radio format. But we want you to go to your local radio station and either buy the time to put it on or see if they'll put it on for free. We didn't have a radio buyer. We had hundreds of them that went out and did this on their own. But eventually we did have a relationship with agencies and went on various and sundry networks and kept a careful watch on which areas that we were on would see an uptick in sales on the things that we would advertise, which would see an uptick in donations, and we would measure all those things. And there were stations that were costing us way more than that we're bringing in. And from time to time, we'd have to cut them off, say, no, we're not going to go on this station anymore. And I was there when those phone calls came in, those people begging and pleading, oh, I've been blessed so much. I know you have. I miss it so much. I know you do. But there is no money to pay for it. Well, again, I'm not blaming the people who called, but I am saying, hey, that's part of the math of the whole thing. So, here I am again asking, would you commit to supporting this ministry, this work? I'm going to ask you to do it every month. You can go to rcsprolljr.com, click on the donate button, and you can set up a monthly donation. It could be $10, it could be $20, it could be $100. Every little bit makes a difference on this end. It's an encouragement to us. It allows us to have the better equipment. And if we ever get to that place, it gives me the time to be able to do this while providing for my family. Thanks for listening. Some time ago, I binge-watched HBO's 10-part miniseries, Band of Brothers. It was most excellent, and I commend it to you. Based on Stephen Ambrose's book of the same name, the account, based on real persons and events, follows Easy Company, part of the 101st Airborne, from training to D-Day, to Bastogne in the Battle of the Bulge, to the liberation of a death camp, to the occupation of Hitler's Eagle's Nest. The closing episode deals in part with an issue not many of us have had to think through. The American soldiers coming to grips with the humanity of the Germans. Turns out, they're human after all. Which doesn't, of course, undo what they did. We comfort ourselves in dehumanizing the Nazis because such makes them something other than us. If their great crimes are an aberration, an anomaly, then we're safe. Then we don't have to see ourselves in them. Nazis, however, is what we are. It is our nature to hate our enemies. It is our nature to kill all who would stand in our way. It is our nature to smugly assume all the world needs is to be reduced down to me and people just like me. When the war ended, however, instead of realizing we are as bad as they are, we made the mistake of thinking they're not so bad after all. They're just like us. What we should have concluded is we're not so good after all. We're just like them. Now, I'm not arguing for some sort of ham-fisted moral equivalency. I'm not suggesting that no person can be more wicked than another, no government more wicked than another, no nation more wicked than another. What I am arguing is that all of those levels of wickedness are decidedly human manifestations. What I'm arguing is that as humans, we are all quite capable of all the sins other humans have committed and more. Sin, no matter how heinous, is never simply a them thing, but is always an us thing. We don't ever get past the storm because it goes where we go. We are the storm. Its being, its essence, its nature is sin, as is our nature. We carry the storm with us. It is joyfully true that in some circumstances, in some times, our Lord is pleased to declare to the storm, "Peace, be still." But when he does, the peace we enjoy is what he wrought, not what we brought to pass. It is his grace, and his grace alone, that restrains me from killing my enemies, even those who merely inconvenience me. Which, of course, leads us right back to that immovable, world-changing calling to repent and believe the gospel. I am the storm, he the peace. As I acknowledge, as I submit to both truths, I remember that he became the storm and has blessed me with the peace. I remember that the real battle is within me, and rejoice in his immovable assurance that he will win. Surrender. You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com. And join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.